Let's start with the first Republican senator to vote for health care reform, Senator Olympia Snowe of Maine. Senator Snowe, thank you so much for voting, for not for voting for the bill, but for coming on the program. But a lot of people are probably thanking you for voting for the bill as well. Let me ask you, who's not thanking you? What's it feel like to be Senator Snowe from Maine today?
Well, you know, you hear all kinds of responses, but it's been very positive and encouraging because people want us to work together to solve the public's problems, and this most notably, of course, is addressing health care reform. So I think from that standpoint, people want to see the system working in Washington, and that's, after all, what it's all about. And building the bipartisan bridges is so essential to accomplishing that.
Well, I was lucky to work for the great Senator Edmund Muskie for 3 years on the Senate Budget Committee staff, and I always looked up to him as someone who could be bipartisan. He and Henry Bellman, the ranking Republican on that committee, were able to forge a bipartisan budget. It was hard to believe these days, every year. Let me ask you, back home, is this a good thing for you?
You know, I think it is. I mean, I think people want us to reform the health care system, but they're concerned about how we go about it. And I think that's the point, Chris. We have to work in a methodical, practical way, not with arbitrary deadlines, and sorting through these issues. As you know, this is highly complex. It's costly. Given the context of the times in which we find ourselves, people are apprehensive and concerned about whether or not Congress will give this the right amount of attention and forethought to do it right. So I think that's where the skepticism comes on the part of the public, and certainly true in Maine. They want us to do something. They just want to make sure that we can get this right and that we don't create unintended and perverse consequences as we go through the overhaul process and what it means to them. So we really got to give it the time, and that's what I'm concerned about, is that we won't have the patience and the perseverance to examine the issues and what works and doesn't work. And that's why I commend Chairman Baucus, frankly, for spending the time over the 4 months to convene the group of 6. And even though we didn't reach an agreement, it gave us the opportunity to sort through all of these issues in a deliberative and methodical fashion.
What is the deal breaker down the road you foresee? Is there something that might come out of that meeting among Senator Reid, Senator Dodd, Senator Baucus, and Rahm Emanuel, the chief of staff to President Obama, that might cause you to have to change your vote on the floor?
Well, there are obviously several things. Overall, it would be whether or not to add dramatically to the cost. Secondly, of course, is the public option. I think there are other ways of accomplishing that goal, short of creating a government program at the outset, that raises a lot of concerns about whether or not government will be running health care, making medical decisions, doing it efficiently and effectively, or more costly. So there are a number of issues in that regard with respect to that approach. Secondly, adding to the cost, making sure we have affordability. These are some of they're going to be the primary issues. And finally, we have to know the final cost before we begin the debate on the floor of the Senate on the motion to proceed, that we have a final score from the Congressional Budget Office so we know exactly the expanse of this bill and how much it will cost as we begin this debate.
What do you see as the bridge between the Baucus bill that you supported yesterday, that is going to be probably the basis for the Senate bill, and what seems to be coming out of those three House committees, the Henry Waxman Committee, of course, the Ways and Means Committee, and the other committee? What do you see as the basis of compromise between the two houses?
Well, I think that hopefully that they would take the Senate Finance Committee's basis for, addressing the costs within the health care system, not going outside health care to raise taxes, for example, having a very expansive approach. I have recommended the trigger as a bridge to a safety net approach for a public option, similar to what we did in the prescription drug program. In fact, was never triggered because there were so many competitive choices. And the same could be true in this instance, frankly. But I think it'd be less ambitious than what exactly has transpired in the House that's raised so many concerns and, frankly, in some ways sidetracked this debate during the course of the summer and not coming up on the part, I think, between the president and the Democratic majority, a coherent approach with one approach, essentially, with a framework that we created a design for the system rather than having multiple approaches that created a lot of confusion on the part of the public.
Well, I just heard you say something that sounds like a deal breaker. If the House version, which contains the notion of taxing the very rich to pay for health care, in other words, going, as you put it, outside the health care situation, the health care system, to simply raise taxes on the wealthy to pay for a health care system, you consider that a deal breaker?
Well, that would be problematic for me, because I don't think that we should do that at this point in time, given the nature of the economy. And we should maintain budget neutrality within the healthcare system and finding the offsets in which to accomplish that goal. Yes, I would find that very difficult to support. And in fact, I've indicated I could not support taking that type of approach, and that's what we adhere to in the group of 6 on a bipartisan basis.
What caused the loss of the other Republicans? I've always been hopeful, or was for a long time, that Mike Enzi would be among those who supported a bipartisan measure from Wyoming. Can you guess as to why he went from being well, he's a CPA, he's an accountant, he knows the numbers, he knows how to crunch them, why he went off? Because I was hopeful he would be on this team.
I think both Senator Enzi and Senator Grassley are serious legislators and contributed mightily to this endeavor that became the basis for the markup in the Senate Finance Committee yesterday. I believe they needed, more time to work through these issues and making decisions. And a lot more information at that point. And obviously there were still differences, and we just didn't have the time to work them through, regrettably. But they were very serious. They made very serious contributions, were there all the time. No one ever missed any meetings or conference calls. And we all made a collective commitment to this effort. So a lot of what was worked into this program was a large part of their efforts as well, even though they couldn't support this bill and some of the things that were in it. And like myself, I couldn't, I didn't support some of these provisions, but also felt that it was important to have the process move forward, because I think that's what the American people want. That's what my constituents want. They want us to give it the time to make the process work. And so I think we have an obligation to fulfill in that regard.
Can you see any other? We're going to speak with Senator Collins, your colleague from Maine, later. Let her speak, obviously, for herself. We're waiting to hear very much from her on this. But are there any other senators outside of Maine in the Republican caucus that might come aboard between now and when this bill comes for final?
Well, Chris, it's hard to say. I think it all depends on people's, disposition and whether or not they want to support a health care reform bill of this magnitude. And I think it also would be predicated on the types of changes that are made on the floor of the Senate. The dynamic can change from day to day, and you just never know. All of a sudden, it could be a catalyst, through the amendment process to bring together and build greater consensus. That's what I'm hopeful for, and certainly through the Democratic centrists as well, that I know will play a key role in this debate. So that might invite stronger and broader support in the final analysis. Time will tell, obviously.
Well, I'm looking at Voinovich in that regard. But let me ask you the last question, the tricky partisan question, the leadership question. Can you tell us if it did happen, whether anyone in the leadership from Senator McConnell on down, that you might be punished in any way for taking this vote?
No, they have never indicated that to me, and I've had very constructive and positive conversations with Leader McConnell and others, and I've never been threatened. I obviously know that they would have preferred that I voted otherwise, but I have no reason to believe the rumors that have been prevailing with respect to that. I obviously have to focus on what's right. I don't get up every day worrying about the perks of the office. It's not what drives me or compels me to do my job. I like focusing on the issues and trying to solve problems. That's the essence of my obligation. So I don't worry about everything else that happens.
Well, you might be getting one of these Profiles in Courage awards from the Kennedy organization up at Harvard. We'll see whether you want one or not. Thank you very much, Senator Olympia Snowe, who's out there voting for health care.